In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless alien species had formed an alliance, Earth was known only as a distant, insignificant planet. It was isolated from the greater galactic community, its inhabitants seen as primitive and underdeveloped. The advanced civilizations that spanned the stars knew little about Earth's inhabitants, except for occasional reports of strange occurrences that rarely caught the attention of the powerful beings ruling the galaxy. But today, Earth was no longer just a distant planet. Today, it was the source of a mystery that would shake the foundations of the Galactic Federation. The prisoner from Earth had arrived. Tsek, a seasoned commander from the Revine species, stood at the control room of the alien facility where the human was being held. The prison was located on an asteroid far from the major hubs of civilization, a place where prisoners from across the galaxy were kept under tight surveillance. The humans had been unaware of the true significance of this prison, a place where the most dangerous beings from the farthest reaches of the universe were contained. Earth had never been involved in intergalactic politics, nor had they sent any ambassadors to the Federation. The Revine commander had no real understanding of what Earth was or its people. All he knew was that the prisoner, a human, had been found alone on an old abandoned starship that had drifted into Revine space. The human, seemingly lost, had been brought aboard and quickly contained. There was nothing particularly special about him. He was just a young man, no older than 25 by human standards, with brown hair and a relatively unremarkable appearance. He had not spoken a word during his entire time aboard the ship. No one could understand why this human, alone in the void of space, had not uttered a single sound. Tsek didn't believe in superstition or oddities. To him, the prisoner was just another anomaly, another puzzle to be solved. But when he watched the crew of the prison station interact with the prisoner, things began to take a strange turn. It started with the guards. At first, there was nothing unusual. The prisoner was brought into a high-security cell, shackled and restrained, with 2 guards assigned to watch him. The guards, both Revan and of various other species, were highly trained and immune to most psychological pressures. But as the hours passed, they began to act strangely. First, they began feeling uneasy. Then they began to whisper to each other, their words filled with uncertainty. When one of the guards, a strong and resolute Yatar, approached the cell to check on the prisoner, something shifted in the air. Tsek observed from the observation deck, noting how the guard's posture changed. Yatar's usual confidence was replaced with visible tension. The guard, his eyes wide and pupils dilated, suddenly collapsed to his knees, clutching his head as if in immense pain. A series of incoherent words escaped his lips, but nothing clear enough to make sense of. Tsek ordered the guard to be taken to the medical bay, thinking it was simply a case of mental exhaustion. But as the second guard, an Irland named Rael, approached to assist, she too was affected by whatever unseen force the human prisoner was emitting. She fell silent, her face twisted in confusion before she too dropped to her knees. Her breathing was shallow and her hands shook uncontrollably. "What's happening?" Tsek demanded, his tone sharp, as he turned to his subordinates. "Explain this to me." They can't hear it, sir," said one of the medical officers, a young Nuan named Drex who was working nearby. "It's like they've been struck by something, a force they can't explain." The medical officer paused as he observed the guards closely. Their eyes flickered, lost in confusion. They seemed to be listening to something, though no one else could hear it. The odd behavior was unlike anything Tsek had ever seen. Tsek took a step forward and ordered that the prisoner be brought to the central observation room for further examination. If something was affecting his crew, it was his responsibility to get to the bottom of it. When the prisoner was brought in, shackled but otherwise silent, all eyes were upon him. The human looked almost serene, completely still in his seat. His eyes met those of the commander and something indescribable stirred in the air. Tsek felt it then, a subtle shift, as though the very air had thickened with something beyond his comprehension. The other alien officers in the room shifted, nervously. Their movements were slow, cautious, as if they too were struggling with something they could not grasp. Tsek, despite his years of military experience, could feel it now. The air itself seemed to press in on him, pulling at his mind, dragging him down a path of confusion and fear. "Who are you?" Tisek demanded, his voice low but authoritative. "What power do you wield?" The prisoner did not respond, his lips unmoving. His silence was unnerving. But what was even more disturbing was that every alien in the room was starting to feel their minds fray, as if the very silence the human emitted was too much to bear. Minutes passed. In those minutes, the room filled, with a cold, gnawing pressure that made the walls feel as though they were closing in on the aliens present. Tisek's vision blurred slightly, and his mind, usually sharp and focused, began to slip into disarray. And then, as if on cue, the first of the aliens collapsed. A high-ranking officer, one of the Zythar, let out a blood-curdling scream and clawed at his own face. The others watched, paralyzed, as the officer fell into a fit of madness, thrashing about wildly. His cries were incoherent, words of terror and insanity filling the air. "What did you do?" Tisek growled, his voice laced with fear. But the prisoner, still silent, only stared. His eyes, deep, empty, and unknowable, seemed to hold secrets no one could unravel. The longer he was in their presence, the more the insanity spread. It was only then that Tisek realized the truth. The human silence was not just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something far darker, something that could break the minds of even the most advanced beings in the galaxy. Tisek turned on his heel, eyes wide with a new creeping fear. Something had been awakened, something terrifying and beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. And this was only the beginning. The medical bay was filled with an uneasy tension. The once orderly and calm atmosphere was now clouded with fear. As alien physicians and guards scurried around, trying to understand the sudden outbreak of madness, Tisek stood at the entrance, his hands clasped behind his back. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't quite piece together. What had happened to his crew? What was this mysterious power that the human prisoner seemed to be exuding without even speaking? The medical officers had already begun working on the first few victims. The Zythar officer who had been the first to collapse had been sedated. But even as he lay unconscious, his body twitched in fits and his face contorted with fear. One of the medical officers, a skilled Yatar named Dr. Fivra, examined the officer's vitals. She shook her head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it," Fivra muttered, glancing at Tisek. "The neural activity in his brain is off the charts. It's as though something the invisible is feeding on his mind. But there's nothing there. Nothing we can see. Nothing tangible." Tisek clenched his fists. "What do you mean by nothing tangible?" Fivra turned her attention back to the unconscious officer, her fingers hovering over his temples as if trying to draw something from his mind. "His brain waves are spiking, but I can't find any physical cause. It's as if his mind is receiving signals that aren't there, or something is being projected into his consciousness." Tisek looked over at the other guards, who were either dazed or in similar states of confusion. No one had any answers, and the more they investigated, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. He needed answers. He needed to understand the force behind the chaos. In a moment of sudden realization, Tisek knew he had to confront the prisoner. Whoever or whatever this human was, he had become the key to everything. The silence was more than just a lack of sound. It was as if it carried with it an invisible weight that bent the very fabric of reality. But how? And why? Without a word, Tisek marched down the sterile corridors of the prison, flanked by two of his most trusted soldiers. The hum of the ventilation system filled the air, but it did little to calm the growing anxiety that had taken root in his chest. The facility, once a symbol of order, now felt like a ticking time bomb. When they reached the containment area, Tisek paused. The human prisoner was in the same cell where he had been placed before. He sat silently in the corner, unmoving, his eyes staring ahead with an eerie calmness. Despite the chaos that had unfolded around him, he appeared completely unaffected. Tisek couldn't understand it. No matter how many beings, how many powerful and seasoned officers were impacted by his presence, the human showed no sign of fear, no sign of stress. He was simply there. His silence, a silence that had already driven so many to madness, was his only weapon. Sek stepped forward and ordered the door to the cell to be opened. As the heavy metal door groaned, he felt the air shift again, that heavy oppressive feeling settling over him and his soldiers. The moment the door was fully open, he could feel it, the weight of the silence pushing against his mind. "Human," Sek called, his voice steady despite the unease creeping over him. "I demand you answer me. What is this power you wield? What have you done to my crew?" The prisoner did not respond, not even a glance in his direction. His eyes remained fixed ahead, unblinking. Sek waited for a sign, any sign, but there was nothing. It was as if the human couldn't hear him, or didn't care to. But the silence was enough. The silence alone made his thoughts feel disjointed, like they were being pulled in 100 different directions at once. Sek was about to speak again when he felt a strange pressure build behind his eyes. It was subtle at first, like a dull ache, but it quickly escalated into something far more intense. His vision blurred, his senses faltering, and he staggered back, clutching his head. "Commander!" one of the soldiers shouted, but Sek could barely hear the words. The silence was deafening, suffocating him in a way he couldn't describe. As the pressure grew, Sek found himself unable to stand. He dropped to his knees, gasping for air, his body trembling. For a moment he could see flashes, visions, of his deepest fears, memories he had long buried resurfacing with terrifying clarity. His mind was being flooded with images he couldn't control. Every part of him screamed for release, but all he could do was endure the relentless, crushing force of the silence. The soldiers around him began to experience the same torment. One by one, they collapsed, clutching their heads as if they were trying to escape the mental onslaught. Their cries were muffled like whispers caught in the void. No matter how hard they tried to resist, they couldn't escape the overwhelming force. Sek struggled to rise, but the pressure on his mind was too much. He could feel his grip on reality slipping, his thoughts scattering like shards of glass. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure stopped. The silence returned to normal, as if the air had released the weight that had been bearing down on them. Sek breathed deeply, his head still spinning, but the terrifying visions were gone. His soldiers, though disoriented, began to recover, their breathing shallow but steady. "What was that?" Sek whispered, his voice hoarse. Fivra, who had arrived at the scene, gave him a grave look. The prisoner. His silence isn't just an absence of sound, it's something much deeper, something beyond our understanding. Whatever he is, it's not just a human anymore. It's like he has the power to reach into our minds and twist them. Sek nodded, his mind reeling. He had seen the effects on his crew, but he still didn't understand the full extent of the human's power. What kind of force could manipulate reality like this? What kind of mind could cause such devastation without even speaking a single word? The questions continued to swirl in his mind as he made his way back to the control room. There had to be an explanation, a way to stop this madness. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized something terrifying. If they couldn't understand what the human was doing, if they couldn't control it, then the entire galaxy might be at risk. The silence was more than just a weapon, it was an enigma, and it was slowly unraveling everything they knew. The news of the human prisoner's strange power had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In the council chambers of the Galactic Federation, leaders from various species gathered, their faces grim as they discussed the situation. The prisoner, an ordinary human from Earth, had caused an unprecedented wave of madness and terror among those who had come into contact with him. What started as a few isolated incidents had now become a crisis that threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. Sek, still reeling from his own encounter with the prisoner, was seated at the head of the council table. His mind was still clouded with the effects of the prisoner's silent presence. Every alien who had ventured close to the human was either incapacitated or had lost their sanity. Some had spoken of hearing voices. Others had seen horrific visions, and a few even claimed to have experienced a complete breakdown of reality itself. The cause remained a mystery, and the fear it instilled in the hearts of the galaxy's leaders was palpable. Tsek looked around at the alien council, noting the nervous glances exchanged between representatives of different species. It was rare for such high-ranking beings to display fear, but it was evident now. Each of them had felt the touch of the silence, and none of them knew how to stop it. The first to speak was a towering Iridian named Vrax, his voice deep and booming. "We cannot let this human remain alive. His presence is a threat to all of us. We have seen what happens when an individual is exposed to his mind. If this continues, we risk losing control of the entire Federation." A Zythar diplomat, Shra, nodded in agreement. "The human has disrupted our operations, our military, and even our most advanced technology. There is no telling how far his influence could spread if left unchecked. We must act now." Tsek listened intently, his mind still struggling to process everything he had witnessed. He had always been a warrior, someone who had dealt with threats directly and swiftly, but this was different. This wasn't an enemy that could be defeated in battle, nor could it be contained with technology. The prisoner's power was beyond anything they had ever encountered. Vera, the lead scientist from the Federation's research division, leaned forward, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "We have analyzed the prisoner's neural activity, and what we've discovered is beyond comprehension. His mind is somehow connected to an ancient power, something we cannot explain. It's as if his very presence is bending the laws of reality, causing hallucinations and madness in those nearby." "Ancient power?" Vrax scoffed. "This human is nothing more than a creature from a primitive world. There is no such thing as ancient power." Vera's eyes narrowed. "You do not understand, Vrax. This is not a simple psychic disturbance. His mind is connected to something far older than any of us, something that existed long before the Federation was formed. The energy he emits is unlike any we have encountered. It's not just a telepathic signal. It's a force that warps perception, making it impossible for the mind to remain stable." Tsek clenched his fists. This was becoming more complicated than he had imagined. "Are you saying we can't stop it?" Vera hesitated, her gaze flickering with doubt. "I don't know. We've tried everything we can think of to isolate and neutralize his influence, but nothing works. It's like his very presence disrupts the fabric of our minds." A silence fell over the council room, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. The leader of the Zythar, Shra, was the first to break it. "Then we must kill him. We cannot allow this threat to continue. If his presence is beyond our control, there is only one solution." Tsek stood, his voice sharp. "We don't even know what he is. He might be the last of his kind, or worse, a weapon. If we kill him, we may never learn the truth. We need to understand what's happening before we make a decision." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but Vrax was not convinced. "Understanding is a luxury we cannot afford. Every moment we waste gives this human more time to destroy us." Tsek locked eyes with the Iridian. "And what if destroying him is the wrong choice? What if we're erasing the key to something even greater?" Vera spoke again, her voice low. "There's more we need to know. There's a connection between this human and the Void Whisperers, a race of beings we know little about. According to ancient texts, the Void Whisperers were capable of manipulating reality itself through silent communication. We believed them to be nothing more than myth, but now it seems they may have been real, and this human may be their descendant or something far worse." The room fell silent once more, as the council members processed the gravity of what Vera had revealed. The Void Whisperers were a name spoken only in legends, beings of immense power who could alter reality with a mere thought. If this human was somehow tied to that ancient race, the Federation was facing a danger that none of them had ever imagined. Tsek glanced around at the council, each leader struggling to grasp the enormity of the situation. The prisoner from Earth had become a symbol of fear, not just because of the madness he caused, but because of the unknown force that seemed to be connected to him. The Federation had faced many enemies in its time, but none like this. "We need to find out more about these Void Whisperers," Tsek said, his voice steady. If this human is tied to them, we need to understand his role in all of this. We cannot allow fear to guide our decisions. If there is a way to control this power, we must find it. Shra's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He had been an advocate for action and violence, but even he seemed unsure of how to approach this. We have no choice but to continue studying him, Vera added. We need to understand how he is connected to the Void Whisperers, and what that means for our future. Tisek nodded. We'll start by isolating the prisoner. We need to study him further, but we must do so with caution. If he is truly the last of his kind, we may be dealing with something more than just a human. We are dealing with a force beyond our comprehension. As the council session ended, Tisek felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. The prisoner, still silent, had no idea of the ripple effect he had caused. His very existence was a mystery, one that could change the galaxy forever. The Federation had always prided itself on its power and knowledge, but now it was facing something that could tear that very foundation apart. The questions remained unanswered. What was the prisoner truly capable of? And what was the true nature of the power he wielded? This third part continues to build tension, with the council debating the best course of action. The mystery surrounding the human prisoner deepens, and the reader is left on edge, wondering what the true nature of his power is, and how the Federation will respond. The fear and uncertainty grow, making it clear that the situation is far more complex than anyone initially thought. The research facility was quieter now, but a tense air hung heavy in the halls. Tisek stood at the observation window, staring out into the void of space. His mind was filled with thoughts of the prisoner and the mysterious power he seemed to possess. The more the Federation learned about the human, the less they understood. But there was one thing they were sure of. The human was not just a simple prisoner. There was something far more complex at work here. Vyra, the lead scientist, had been working tirelessly, analyzing every scrap of data they had gathered about the prisoner. Tisek knew that the answers were within reach, but it was taking longer than he had hoped. He needed to know what they were dealing with, and fast. When Vera entered the room, she was holding a data pad in her hands, her face pale with exhaustion. "Commander, we've found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tisek turned to face her, his eyes sharp. "What is it?" Vera set the pad on the table and gestured for Tisek to come closer. "We've been researching Earth's history. There are no official records from the Federation about the planet, but we've managed to access some ancient, forbidden archives. What we found is unsettling." Tisek narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Vera hesitated for a moment, then began. "The Earthlings, humans, are not as primitive as we once believed. According to these records, Earth was home to a powerful and mysterious race long before any of the current civilizations. They were called the Void Whisperers. These beings had the ability to manipulate reality itself through their thoughts, without ever speaking a word. The humans, however, were not aware of their true origins. It seems that over time, the Void Whisperers' power faded away, and the humans became just another primitive species. Tisek's mind raced as Vera continued. The Void Whisperers were able to influence the very fabric of reality with their silent presence. They could bend time, alter perception, and even control minds. It's clear that the prisoner, the human we've captured, has inherited this ability. He may be the last of his kind, or perhaps he is the key to unlocking something even more dangerous. Are you telling me that this human is somehow connected to the Void Whisperers? Tisek asked, disbelief in his voice. Vera nodded slowly. Yes, it's as though he carries the last remnants of their power. The data we've gathered shows that his neural activity is off the charts. It's not just telepathy. It's something far beyond anything we've seen before. His mind is tapping into something ancient, something beyond the limits of our understanding. Tisek felt a chill run down his spine. The idea that a single human could wield such unimaginable power was terrifying, but even more unsettling was the fact that they still had no idea how to control it. We've been trying to find a way to block his influence, Vera continued. But so far, nothing has worked. The silence he projects is not just an absence of sound, it's a force in itself, one that disrupts the minds of those around him. It's like a wave of pressure crushing the will of anyone who gets too close. Tsek clenched his fists. Then what do you suggest we do? Vera hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know. We've tried everything, medications, neural shields, even isolation. Nothing seems to work. The only thing we know for sure is that the longer we keep him here, the more dangerous he becomes. His influence is spreading. Tsek's thoughts raced. The Federation was already on edge. The prisoner's power was spreading fear among the alien races, and if they couldn't stop it, the entire galaxy could be in danger. But the more they tried to understand the prisoner, the more they realized they were dealing with something far more ancient and far more powerful than they had ever imagined. We need to understand more about these void whisperers, Tsek said, his voice firm. If this human is the last of his kind, then he may hold the key to something we cannot afford to ignore. We cannot let fear guide our actions. We need to find out how this power works and how we can control it. Vera nodded slowly. I agree, but we'll need more time. The information we have is incomplete, and there are still many gaps in our understanding. If the Void Whisperers were as powerful as these records suggest, then we may be dealing with something far beyond anything we can comprehend. Tsek sighed, his thoughts weighing heavily on him. Time is something we don't have. The Federation is already divided on what to do with this human. Some are calling for his immediate execution. Others want to use him as a weapon. But neither of those options will solve the problem. We need answers. And we need them now. Vera placed a hand on the table, her fingers tapping nervously. I've been thinking about this a lot, Commander. If the human's mind is connected to the Void Whisperer's power, then perhaps there's a way to communicate with him. Perhaps we can unlock the knowledge hidden in his mind. If we can do that, maybe we can find a way to control the power, or even understand it. Tsek's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting we try to communicate with him? Vera nodded. Yes, but it's a dangerous risk. If we approach him in the wrong way, we could trigger an even stronger reaction. We've already seen how quickly his influence spreads. But if we don't try, we may never learn the truth. Tsek stood in silence for a long moment, considering her words. The idea of trying to communicate with the prisoner was risky, but it was the only option they had left. If there was any chance of understanding the power he wielded, they had to take it. Very well, Tsek said finally, his voice steady. We'll proceed with caution, but be prepared for anything. If this goes wrong, we may not be able to stop it. As he turned to leave the room, Vera's voice stopped him. Commander, there's one more thing. I believe the prisoner's silence is not just a power. It's a form of communication. I think he's trying to tell us something. We just have to figure out how to listen. Tsek paused at the door, his thoughts swirling. The prisoner's silence had already caused so much chaos, but what if there was more to it? What if it wasn't just a weapon, but a message? The answers were still out of reach, but one thing was certain. They were running out of time. This fourth part builds on the mystery of the prisoner and delves deeper into the ancient origins of his power. As Tsek and Vera struggle to understand the full extent of the prisoner's abilities, the reader is left with more questions than answers, increasing the suspense and tension surrounding the situation. The council chamber was filled with the sounds of hushed murmurs as alien leaders from across the galaxy gathered to make a decision about the human prisoner. The weight of their deliberations hung heavy in the air, as every representative understood the gravity of the situation. The fate of not just one life, but the future of the galaxy itself, rested on the outcome of this meeting. Tsek stood at the front of the room, his posture straight, his face grim. He had been preparing for this moment for days, but now that it had come, he felt the pressure weighing down on him. The prisoner, a simple human from Earth, had become the most dangerous and unpredictable force the Federation had ever encountered. His power, born of silence, had disrupted the minds of those who came into contact with him. Some had gone mad, Others had fallen unconscious, and a few had even disappeared without a trace. The Federation had tried everything to understand him, to find a way to control his influence, but each attempt had failed. The prisoner's silent presence seemed to warp reality, bending the minds of even the most powerful beings. He was, in a sense, a living weapon, and yet, there was something more, something that no one had fully grasped yet. As the council members settled into their seats, the room grew quiet. All eyes were on Tsek, who began to speak. "We are facing a threat unlike anything we've ever known. A threat that cannot be measured by weapons, technology, or even the power of our fleets. This human, this prisoner, holds within him a power that is both ancient and terrifying. We have tried to understand it, we have studied it, but the truth remains elusive. We cannot afford to act out of fear, but we cannot afford to ignore the danger he represents." Tsek paused, his eyes sweeping over the council. "The question before us is simple. What do we do with the human? Do we destroy him and risk losing the key to something far greater than we understand? Or do we try to communicate with him, to unlock the knowledge hidden within his mind, even if it means risking our own sanity?" A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the leaders looked uneasy, while others were resolute. The Iridian representative, Vrax, was the first to speak. "The longer we keep this human alive, the greater the risk. His power is uncontrollable, and we've already seen the damage it can cause. I agree with the motion to eliminate him before he does any more harm." Tsek's eyes narrowed. "But do you understand what you're asking for? To kill him is to eliminate our only chance of understanding what's truly happening. If we destroy him now, we may never learn the full extent of his power, or what he might be connected to." Vrax didn't flinch. "I understand the risk, but I also understand the danger. If we allow this human to live, he could unleash something far worse than any of us can imagine. We've already seen how his silence affects our minds. Imagine what would happen if we let him continue to live. If we don't act now, it may be too late." The Zithar representative, Shraa, leaned forward, his sharp gaze fixed on Tsek. "You speak of understanding, Commander, but I believe we have already seen enough. This human is a threat to our very existence. His presence destabilizes everything. We have no choice but to destroy him and end this madness." Tsek clenched his fists, frustration creeping into his voice. "You want to destroy him without understanding what he is? Without knowing what he could mean for the future? That is not the way of the Federation. We seek knowledge, not destruction." Vyra, the Federation's lead scientist, stood up. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of years of research. "Tsek is right. We have to consider the long-term consequences. If the prisoner is truly connected to the Void Whisperers, then he may hold the key to something far greater than just a weapon. We could be looking at a source of knowledge that could change the galaxy forever. But that knowledge is locked within him, and we may never reach it if we take the path of destruction." A silence fell over the room. The leaders of the Federation were divided. Some felt that the prisoner was too dangerous to be allowed to live, while others believed that the potential rewards of understanding him far outweighed the risks. Tsek took a deep breath and addressed the council. "We have tried to isolate him, to block his influence, but nothing has worked. But perhaps we need to try something different. Instead of forcing the prisoner to reveal his secrets, what if we approach him with respect? What if we allow him to speak, not with words, but through his silence? There is power in silence, and I believe that if we approach him with patience, we can unlock the truth that lies within him." Shraa scoffed. "Patience? You want us to trust this human, who has already proven himself to be a threat? What makes you think he will cooperate with us?" Tsek's voice was firm. "Because I believe there is more to this than we understand. The prisoner is not just a human. He is a link to something ancient, something beyond our comprehension. If we destroy him now, we may be destroying the key to a power that could change the course of our history. We must approach this with caution, but we must also be willing to take a chance." The debate continued for what felt like hours, with each representative arguing for their position. But as the discussions wore on, one thing became clear. The Federation could not afford to act in haste. The prisoner was a symbol of fear, but he was also a symbol of hope. His silence held the potential for understanding, for discovery, for power. In the end, it was decided that they would attempt one final approach. A small team, led by Tisek himself, would be sent to communicate with the prisoner. They would attempt to understand the nature of his power and find a way to harness it. If they succeeded, they would unlock the mysteries of the Void Whisperers and perhaps even find a way to use the prisoner's abilities for the good of the galaxy. If they failed, the decision was made. The human prisoner would not be destroyed. At least, not yet. The fate of the Federation now rested in the hands of Tisek and his team. As the council session ended, Tisek stood silently in the chamber, his mind filled with doubts and hopes in equal measure. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was the moment that would define the future of the galaxy. This fifth part explores the tension between destruction and discovery, building toward a critical decision about the prisoner's fate. The Council's divided opinions reflect the fear and uncertainty surrounding the human's power, while Tisek's resolve to seek understanding adds depth to his character. The reader is left wondering whether the decision will lead to salvation or catastrophe. So many